Jimi Hendrix, James Marshall Jimi Hendrix, born Johnny Allen Hendrix, November 27, 1942, was an American rock guitarist, singer, and songwriter. His mainstream career lasted only 4 years, but he is widely regarded as one of the most influential guitarists in history and one of the most celebrated musicians of the 20th century. The Rock and Roll Hall of Fame describes him as the greatest instrumentalist in the history of rock music. Born in Seattle, Washington, Hendrix began playing guitar at age 15. In 1961, he enlisted in the U.S. Army and trained as a paratrooper in the 101st Airborne Division, but he was discharged the following year. He moved to Clarksville, Tennessee soon after and began playing gigs on the Chitlin circuit, earning a place in the Isley Brothers' backing band and later with Little Richard, with whom he continued to work through mid-1965. He played with Curtis Knight and the Squires before moving to England in late 1966 after being discovered by Linda Keith, who interested bassist Chaz Chandler of The Animals in becoming his first manager. Within months, Hendrix earned 3 UK top 10 hits with the Jimi Hendrix Experience, Hey Joe, Purple Haze, and The Wind Cries Mary. He achieved fame in the US after his performance at the Monterey Pop Festival in 1967, and his third and final studio album Electric Ladyland reached #1 in the US in 1968. It was Hendrix's most commercially successful release and his only #1 album. He was the world's highest-paid performer, and he headlined the Woodstock Festival in 1969 and the Isle of Wight Festival in 1970. He died from barbiturate-related asphyxia on September 18, 1970, at age 27. Hendrix was inspired by American rock and roll and electric blues. He favored overdriven amplifiers with high volume and gain and was instrumental in popularizing the previously undesirable sounds caused by guitar amplifier feedback. He was also one of the first guitarists to make extensive use of tone-altering effects units in mainstream rock, such as fuzz distortion, Octavia, wah-wah, and univibe. He was the first musician to use stereophonic phasing effects in recordings. Holly George Warren of Rolling Stone writes, Hendrix pioneered the use of the instrument as an electronic sound source. Players before him had experimented with feedback and distortion, but Hendrix turned those effects and others into a controlled fluid vocabulary, every bit as personal as the blues with which he began. In 1967, readers of Melody Maker voted Hendrix the Pop Musician of the Year, and Rolling Stone declared him the Performer of the Year in 1968. Disc and Music Echo magazine honored him with the World Top Musician of 1969, and Guitar Player named him the Rock Guitarist of the Year in 1970. The Jimi Hendrix Experience was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in 1992 and the UK Music Hall of Fame in 2005. Rolling Stone ranked the band's 3 studio albums among the 100 greatest albums of all time and ranked Hendrix the greatest guitarist and the 6th greatest artist of all time. Hendrix entered a small club in Clarksville, Tennessee, in July 1962, drawn in by live music. He stopped for a drink and ended up spending most of the $400 that he had saved during his time in the army. I went in this jazz joint and had a drink, he explained. I liked it and I stayed. People tell me I get foolish, good-natured sometimes. Anyway, I guess I felt really benevolent that day. I must have been handing out bills to anyone that asked me. I came out of that place with $16 left. Alcohol eventually became the scourge of his existence, driving him to fits of pique, even rare bursts of atypical physical violence. Roby and Schreiber assert that Hendrix first used LSD when he met Linda Keith in late 1966. Shapiro and Glebeek, however, assert that Hendrix used it in June 1967 at the earliest, while attending the Monterey Pop Festival. According to Hendrix biographer Charles Cross, the subject of drugs came up one evening in 1966 at Keith's New York apartment. One of Keith's friends offered Hendrix acid, a street name for LSD, but Hendrix asked for LSD instead, showing what Cross describes as his naivety and his complete inexperience with psychedelics. Before that, Hendrix had only sporadically used drugs, experimenting with cannabis, hashish, amphetamines, and occasionally cocaine. After 1967, he regularly used cannabis, hashish, LSD, and amphetamines, particularly while touring. According to Cross, few stars were as closely associated with the drug culture as Jimi. Details are disputed concerning Hendrix's last day and death. He spent much of September 17, 1970, with Monica Danneman in London, the only witness to his final hours. Danneman said that she prepared a meal for them at her apartment in the Samarkand Hotel around 11 p.m. when they shared a bottle of wine. She drove him to the residence of an acquaintance at approximately 1:45 a.m., where he remained for about an hour before she picked him up and drove them back to her flat at 3 a.m. She said that they talked until around 7 a.m. when they went to sleep. She awoke around 11 a.m. and found Hendrix breathing but unconscious and unresponsive. She called for an ambulance at 11:18, which arrived at 11:27. Paramedics then transported Hendrix to St. Mary Abbott's Hospital, where Dr. John Bannister pronounced him dead at 12:45 on September 18. Coroner Gavin Thurston ordered a post-mortem examination, which was performed on September 21 by Professor Robert Donald Tier, a forensic pathologist. Thurston completed the inquest on September 28 and concluded that Hendrix aspirated his own vomit and died of asphyxia while intoxicated with barbiturates. Citing insufficient evidence of the circumstances, he declared an open verdict. Danneman later revealed that Hendrix had taken 9 of her prescribed Vesparax sleeping tablets, 18 times the recommended dosage. Jimi Hendrix was 27 years old